we confirm that the number or the percentage of severe and critical infections had been noted to be increasing for these past weeks. We are noting also that most of these admitted severe and critical, 60% of them are unvaccinated or just partially vaccinated. Tandaan po natin, ang sinasabi po ng ating projections, base po sa ating mga experts, na maaring tumaas ang pagkaka-ospital in the coming months kung hindi talaga tataas ang pag-receive ng booster doses ng ating mga kababayan. So yun pa rin, ang panawagan natin sa ating mga kababayan, magpabakuna tayo para hindi magtuloy-tuloy ang pagtaas ng mga malulubhang sakit sa ating bansa.
From the nation's capital, all sides, all the time. I'm Ed Lingao.
And I'm Gretchen Ho. The big story tonight.
The health department confirms that severe and critical cases of COVID-19 in hospitals are again on the rise.
Officer in charge Maria Rosario Vergeres says more than half of these patients are either unvaccinated or partially vaccinated. In a media forum, Vergeres said severe and critical infections have reached over 800 or 9% of hospital admissions over the past weeks. But she said this has yet to reach a threshold of 10% or 1,000 patients. Still, Vergeres reminds Filipinos to get inoculated, as 60% of severe and critical cases in hospitals are either unvaccinated or only partially vaccinated.
Sabi po ng ating projections, base po sa ating mga experts, na maaring tumaas ang pagkaka-ospital in the coming months kung hindi talaga tataas ang pag-receive ng booster doses ng ating mga kababayan. So yun pa rin, ang panawagan natin sa ating mga kababayan, magpabakuna tayo para hindi magtuloy-tuloy ang pagtaas ng mga malulubhang sakit sa ating bansa.
I suppose that's an important qualifier kasi most people have been looking only at the number of new COVID infections over the weeks. But that doesn't really tell you the big story or the full picture. You really have to look at the severe and critical cases.
And
that are
I think
going to
it's been a while since we saw this high of a number in terms of severe and critical cases. And we have to think also of the vaccination numbers that we have. Currently, I think 72.3 million fully vaccinated, 1.9 million have gotten their second booster. For our kids in school, I believe the number is 19%. 91% for teachers and school staff. So we have a lot of questions about what this means for our COVID response. And to join us in the conversation, our big question tonight. You can chime in. How can government encourage more people to get booster shots? That is the question. Share your thoughts on our Facebook and YouTube live stream or post a tweet with the hashtag #TheBigStory.
Residents of flood-prone Hagonoy in Bulacan are now asking their local officials to come up with long-term solutions for the frequent flooding in the area. Juan Gualvez with the story.
Houses and roads submerged in floods. This has been a common scene for residents in Barangay San Miguel, Hagonoy, Bulacan, even if there's no storm.
Siyempre, natatakot din kami. Baka bukas pagising namin, malaki pa dyan yung tubig. Yung bahay namin, mababa lang, linulubog ng tubig.
Sanay na ho kami sa ganitong kalagayan. Marami tayong mga government officials na nagsasabi, natutulong sa ating mga mamamayan, pero mulat sa pulho, ganito na ang aming kalagayan.
Marita's family had to take matters into their own hands by elevating their house. This is now the third time they've done this to prevent their home from being flooded.
Kung hindi ka magpapataas, kawawa yung mga bata, lalo pag may estudyante. Malaki-laki na rin po ang nagastos. Dahil ito, hindi pa gaanong tapos, talagang magastos.
Flooding has been a long-term problem here in Hagonoy, which worsens when there's a typhoon or heavy rainfall.
Kaya po mabagal yung pagkatin ng tubig kasi po dala nung yung bagyo, hangin, hindi po siya makadire-diretso ng pagbaba sa dagat. So napipigil po and then yun nga po umulan. So kaya po tuloy-tuloy yung paglaki.
Residents in Hagonoy have also adjusted with their mode of transportation.
This is what they call tikling, or an elevated version of the tricycle. It's more than a meter higher compared to an ordinary one, which enables it to drive through floods of even up to waist height.
Passengers have to pay an additional 5 to 10 pesos when riding the tikling. The local government explains that the high tide in Hagonoy starts every May and June and lasts until January. This happens when upland dams such as Angat and Ipo release water. The water flows down to Pampanga River going to different towns including Hagonoy. And once high tide takes place in Manila Bay, Hagonoy is immediately affected. Roads in the area have been elevated but the homes are still left submerged. There's also a garbage disposal problem in the municipality.
Yung kailugan namin at pati yung mga sapa ay talaga pong kumbaga bahaw na. So pag ito po yung mahuhukay, so magkakaroon po ng magiging malalim na tubig sa ilog, sa kailugan. So yung pumupunta pong mga tubig sa karsada, dito na po mapupunta sa kailugan. So mababawasan po yung tubig sa karsada.
The LGU is now calling on the provincial and national government for additional budget to continuously dredge the river and build the dike. For News 5, Mon Gualvez, we are One News.
After the break, we'll talk about the Filipino-Canadian who declares herself the Queen of Canada. Political analyst Ronald Llamas will join us later on in the show to give us his insights. That when the big story returns, keep it here on One News.
The number of days that you could have a catastrophic fire back in the day might have been 2 or 3. Climate change comes along and suddenly things begin to change. Now it could be 40 or 50 or 60 or 80 days a year where the wrong start in the wrong place creates a catastrophic result. Our primary goal is to contain the fire, to slow its spread and its intensity, and have a successful initial attack and a successful containment on the ground. The evolution of air tanker fleets has been driven by 2 primary things: the availability of aircraft, and it's been driven by the availability of fuel. We're transitioning from our Convairs and our Electras to our RJ85s and our Q400s that represent a significant change in design standard. So our role and our staff of engineers' role is to put systems in the aircraft to manage those additional stresses to make sure that the aircraft can safely conduct an aerial firefighting mission within the capabilities of the airframe's design. Along with making sure your fleet is modern, it's designed to the highest engineering standards, agencies are also beginning to look at the entire supply chain, and speed is critical. Decisions need to be made in minutes, from the time a fire is detected till the time a resourcing decision is made. That's absolutely key in any response and any approach to dealing with climate change. We've developed a host of aircraft that we believe provides a balance. There's an amphibious air tanker, which is an aircraft that skim water across the top of a lake, fill up their tanks, normally inject some sort of a surfactant into the water and deliver it to the fire. Then there's the land-based air tanker, typically a retrofitted.
You're watching The Big Story here in One News. While the title of Queen of Canada is officially claimed by Queen Elizabeth II, the Filipino-Canadian says that she has taken over the rulership of that country. Romana Didulo has amassed thousands of followers in the North American country, many of whom are also followers of QAnon, a conspiracy theory and political movement that has roots in the U.S. Apart from issuing her own proclamations and decrees, she has also declared unlawful the administering of COVID-19 vaccines and the wearing of face masks. In her latest social media post, Didulo even appointed herself as the mediator between the United States and Russia pertaining to the Ukraine crisis. Last week, Didulo also made headlines after her disciples attempted to make a citizen's arrest of police officers in Peterborough. The stunt prompted warnings from experts that similar events are possible in the future as online groups become more encouraged to do the same. And here to give us his insights on the so-called new Queen of Canada, we have with us live here in the studio political analyst, and actually I'd like to call him political strategist, Ronald Llamas. Good evening, Ronald, and thank you for joining us.
Good evening, Ed. Good evening,
Good evening.
Gretchen.
Okay, well, we're bringing you in here because of your background as a political strategist, as well as your background in mass movements, in organizing mass movements, because obviously Ms. Jolo has been able to organize her own mass movement, amazingly, in another country. And she's presenting herself as the sovereign of what she calls the Great White North.
Yes.
Well, obviously her ethnic background is not white. Which is
amazing.
Which is amazing. Well, actually, that's what I want to go into.
Yeah.
How was she able to do that?
Yeah. Well, unang-una, I would like to disclaim na I have any relationship with this with her conspiracy
I never
theories.
implied that.
Even if we, in a way, we are both organizers of political movements. No? I've spent my whole life organizing political movements since I was young. No? What makes the Romana Didolo example dangerous is that it is not an isolated case. No? She admits that she's a believer in the American conspiracy theories based on QAnon, no? Which was established or which was created in 2017. Ostensibly, it's a conspiracy based on an attempt allegedly by Obama to launch a coup d'etat against then President Trump. So it is based on a theory that there's a cabal of Satanist worshippers
And pedophiles.
Involved in sex trafficking of children.
Using pizza.
Yeah, started in a pizzeria scandal against Hillary Clinton. Ito daw yung basis nitong QAnon na ito. No? At because of that, it started with a anonymous Q. No? Na hanggang ngayon hindi identified.
Let me cut you off there. Well, obviously, the QAnon movement has grown by leaps and bounds during Trump's time. Pero I suppose yung big question on other people's minds is, here's a Filipina who's obviously very Filipina pa. She was born here. She migrated to Canada when she was 15. And she was able to establish herself as the leader of this new group as the face of the Great White Nation.
Well, hindi natin alam yung kanyang personal background. No? Kahit nga yung Canadian authorities, hindi malinaw sa kanila kung kailan siya pumasok ng Canada. Ang kanilang assumption ay 30 years ago. Pero hindi ganun kalinaw ano yung kanyang personal profile, hindi malinaw kung meron siyang pamilya. No? Yung kanyang exact age ay hindi rin malinaw. They presume between 55 and 60. So,
but that's a secret naman talaga.
So very mysterious, no? Paano kung siya ay immigrant, kung illegal immigrant siya, siyempre may passport siya. Siyempre may residency card siya. Pero dito parang wala eh. So I presume na hanggang ngayon ay illegal siya dahil walang data about her. Pero ang mahalaga kasi sa mga ganyang klaseng mga proyekto, conspiracy theory, yung populist political project katulad ng nilaunch ni Romana, ay ano yung kanyang mensahe? No? Usually, these people thrive during a time of crisis. No? Ang sinasakyan nila ay yung insecurity ng mga tao and they provide answers. Kaya yung conspiracy theory nila is an attempt to provide an analysis and a target. No? An enemy.
To blame.
Yeah, an enemy, someone or something to blame, and an aspiration for a solution, for a grand solution. No? In a way, parang si Trump. No? Ang problema is the swamp. Ang solution is to make America great again. Pero this is not new. No? Nangyari yan historically, kahit nung Black Plague. No? May conspiracy theory that the ones who created the Black Plague were the Jews. No? So, tapos after that, nung Middle Ages, ang nagkaroon ng crisis, no? Sa Europe, ang biniblame nila ay women, so they create witch hunts. Don't forget, hundreds of thousands of women were killed on the premise na merong conspiracy yung mga witches. No? At fast forward, during the turn of the century, diyan naman sumulpot yung mga fascists katulad ni Hitler and Mussolini based on a conspiracy that the problems of their country, Italy, Germany, the world, is because of the Jewish plot. No? At ang solusyon is to exterminate them. No?
So, ang question ko po dito, sino po yung kaaway? Kasi may kaaway doon, Jews ang kaaway. Dito naman, sino po yung kaaway? And you were mentioning a while ago, dogma, related to American politicians, but they're in Canada.
Yeah.
And how does that link to each other? And just to supplement that, I guess, with information, sinasabi rin niya na utilities are supposed to be free, taxes should be optional. Sinasabi din ni Jolo na all debts have been wiped clean. She's also an anti-vaxxer. So how does this all fit and appeal to the Canadian followers?
First of all, yung QAnon conspiracy is now global. Hindi na lang siya US or Canada. Meron na rin siya sa Europe.
May kilala mga Pilipino na, no?
Posible, dahil meron tayong Proud Boys dito eh. No? Yeah, merong chapter sila dito ngayon. No? So, siya ay global na. No? May iba-ibang permutations. May iba-ibang personification. Si Romana is the personification sa Canada. No? Ikalawa ay, ang basihan niya ay yung mga problema ng mga Canadians. No? Na-embellish na. Nabanggit mo nga, Gretchen, problema sa taxation, problema sa mortgage, no? Problema sa mga police, no? At ngayon, problema sa COVID. No? Kaya nga, ang sinasabi ni Romana, yung magpapaturok, yung magtuturok ng vaccine, no? Yung magpapatest, no? Ay pwedeng parusahan ng kamatayan. No? A death penalty, yung kanyang pinopropose.
Yeah, meron din siya sinasabi na violent statements that if you don't follow or if you don't follow her edicts, you can get removed and blocked from the Telegram pages. I mean, it's kind of ludicrous. Why do you think people still
Yes, dahil sabi niya, nagdeklara siya ng martial law sa Canada. Di ba? Yun ang sinasabi niya. Kaya pwede niyang gawin itong mga napaka-nakakatawa na mga proposal na ito. Pero mas ang problema ay baka gawin ng kanyang followers. No? I'm not sure gaano kalaki yung kanyang following. Ang sabi, merong 70,000 subscribers. No? They're not necessarily followers. Yung mga gatherings niya, hindi naman umaabot na 1,000 pa eh. No? It's just...
Kala pa ni Ed Lingaw.
At most a couple of hundreds. No? At most. So hindi pa sila... Ang mas ngayon, ang tingin ko, is the media hype. Dahil parang nangyayari ito sa Canada. No? Pwedeng mangyari yan sa US, no?
Where people are supposedly so polite.
Yeah, Canada is supposed to be the European yung standards in terms of education, social welfare, immigration laws, no? So they're not very violent, no? And they're not very racist, no? Hindi ganun kataas yung level ng racism at saka kaya nung lumabas siguro si Romana ay parang what? No? So for now, it's not like QAnon in the US, which lumawak na to some extent na pwedeng magpanalo ng presidente. No? Pero because it happened in Canada, then it became very volatile, very high profile. No? Pero for now, I will doubt yung influence niya sa Canadian society.
How seriously should we take her?
Marami sa mga movement na ganyan, nagsimula rin namang maliit eh. Nagsimula rin insignificant eh. Eventually, because of a confluence of events, halimbawa ngayon, technology, social media is expanding the possibilities of these fringe groups. They become no longer fringe, they become mainstream because of technology. No? Kaya mas ang delikado ay yung anong gagawin ng kanyang mga followers. I-implement ba niya yung proposal niya na kailangan parusahan or patayin ang mga magpapabaksin? No? Kailangan ba ay i-arestuhin nila ang mga pulis dahil illegal to mga to? Kung gagawin nila yan, naalala mo yung panahon mo, Ed, Yung Lapi ang Malaya, yung lumusob sa Malacanang. Nung panahon ni Marcos, di ba, namassacre sila dahil combination na ng Rizalista.
Ano man, kailan man yun na matanda ka sa akin. But let me ask you this. We're running out of time, but let me ask you this.
Yeah.
The reason we also brought you here is because the default of most people when it comes to stories like these is to laugh it off and dismiss it.
Yeah.
But obviously, authorities in Canada are paying attention. They're taking this very seriously. Because of on several levels, and because of many things. In fact, it came out in so many media outlets already. The concern over this. So, how should we look at these things? How should we react to these things? Again, the default is to laugh at it.
I agree na dapat seryosohin ito. No? Kahit sa ating bansa, nakita natin yung political implications na ito. Nagkaroon tayo ng isang presidente na who projects himself as bigger than life, the Punisher, who will solve crime in 6 months, who will ride the jet ski and maglagay ng flag sa islands ng mga Chinese. So hindi siya malayo sa ating karanasan, no? Dati pinagtatawanan si Trump until he became president. So
until he almost became president again.
Yeah. So dapat seryosohin ito, no? At wala lang nga tayong oras, pwede natin balikan sa kasaysayan yung mga similar dangerous presidents ng ganitong klaseng phenomena. No? Kaya binanggit ko kanina si Mussolini at si Hitler, nagsimula rin yan bilang mga fringe groups with the laughable conspiracy theories na eventually naging mainstream, no? At eventually ay halos ginulo, hindi lamang yung kanilang mga bansa, kundi buong mundo. So, this is no laughing matter. No? I agree with you. No? Dapat seryosohin. Pero this is a confluence of different aspects ng ating lipunan. No? Yung religion, yung populist politics, at yung mga problema ng mga tao na sinasakyan nitong mga theories na ito. No? Yun yung mahalaga.
May formula pala eh. No?
Yes. So it's a confluence of events which makes it very dangerous.
Alright, maraming salamat to our political strategist, Ronald Llamas. Thank you for joining us in the studio.
Thank you for joining us.
After the break, we'll take a look into my recent visit to Sulu with Bok and Tingao. That and more when the big story returns. Keep it here on One News.
Do you hate Facebook but like your friends? If you live in Europe, your life might be about to get a whole lot easier. Starting in 2024, the European Union is going to require big tech companies like Meta and Apple to make it possible to send messages between their messaging apps. That might let an iMessage user chat with a WhatsApp account. The technical name for this is interoperability, and it's part of the EU's Digital Markets Act, legislation intended at loosening big tech's grip on the digital market. The EU's thinking is that messaging locks users into the tech giants' platforms because leaving WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger means losing the ability to communicate with all your friends. But thanks to the EU, you'll be able to send a message from a smaller competitor like Viber to someone using iMessage. And if every company signs on, then you might be able to communicate with everyone using just a single messaging app. This change clearly would make life easier for consumers, but it's quite controversial. Some technologists think it could break end-to-end encryption or stifle the innovation that makes messaging platforms fun. And if smaller companies like Signal or even the big tech companies decide they don't want to use these new technical standards to connect their massive messaging platforms, some argue the law is completely useless. It will take several years before the EU's rules go into effect, but if this new interoperability requirement works, it could have a huge impact on big tech's behavior and the way you communicate. And of course, where the EU leads in terms of tech regulation, the US often follows.
从毕业那一刻，毕业之前还会谈梦想，谈什么，就是规划自己的未来。但从出来社会的那一刻，找工作的那一刻，你发现你的就是一个搅碎机，把你的未来已经搅碎了。你能不能重组，你不知道呀。
For decades, having a university degree in China has largely been a surefire path to higher earnings. But that may be changing. The country's COVID-0 policy, combined with a crackdown on some private enterprises, has pushed youth unemployment to 20%. That leaves an estimated 15 million Chinese between the ages of 16 to 24 out of work. Among those affected is Lu Chen. She struggled to find a job despite a new master's
You're still watching the big story here on One News. It has been a year since a C-130 plane crashed in Sulu, killing 50 people in its wake. Ed Lingao and I, together with the Philippine Air Force and the MVP Group Foundations, visited the site to check up on the residents and provide help, especially to young learners. Let's watch this. It's back to school for 14-year-old and now grade 8 student Kandawi Ahadi, yet he's nervous about going back to face-to-face classes. Just a year after the deadliest aviation crash in Philippine military history that killed more than 50 soldiers and 3 civilians, Kandawi and his mother still remember the sound of the C-130 plane crashing in their copra field in Patikul, Sulu.
Bali yung hangin, may kasama ng apoy. Kaya nasunog na yung buong mukha niya, dalawang braso, saka dalawang binti. Ay, oo, yung dalawa. Yung buong mukha niya talaga yan, ma'am, na nasunog. Pati mga buhok niya, nasunog lahat.
Together with the Philippine Air Force and the MVP Group Foundation heads, Ed Lingao and I hopped on a C-295 plane to Jolo, Sulu to check in on the families affected by the C-130 crash. 9 families, including Kandawi's, received financial assistance from the PLDT Smart, One Meralco, and Metro Pacific Investment Foundations. Kandawi's mom says the donation will be used for his education since he dreams of becoming part of the Air Force one day. Getting in uniform is also the dream of some of these tausogs. Known to be heroes during the C-130 crash, they entered dangerous ground to be able to save soldiers and civilians from the crash site. 52 survived the incident. With the help of the Makati Medical Center Foundation, 12 tausog heroes, some soldiers, as well as members of the Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Office of Sulu, received a search and rescue auxiliary training refresher course. First aid response and basic life skills were taught to equip them with knowledge on how to stabilize patients before professional help arrives.
Nakamahalaga sa akin sa buong buhay ko na binigyan kami ng opportunity na mag-training kasi ng C-130 crash, yung ginawa lang namin kung paano sila ialis doon sa delikadong lugar.
And after 2 days, they're not only going home as certified first responders, 30 of them also received their new hospital in a bikes from PLDT, Women in Action, and the Israel Embassy. With classes starting, we also dropped by some schools in Jolo. Data from the UNICEF says education in the Barm region has been left behind even before the pandemic. In 2019, over 45,000 children had no access to a school. 48.5% of indigenous children attended elementary, and only 11.2% finished basic education. The Sulu provincial government says a majority of the public elementary schools in Jolo have computer labs but lack internet connection.
Kaso naggagawa lang ako ng mga sinusulat ko sa akin na piprint sa laman. Pwede spend money. Zero ko kaya gawa ng mga documents.
To aid the teachers amidst the educational crisis that the region is facing, Ed Lingao came with laptops and projectors to give to some madrasa and public schools.
Ngayon po, ito kasing project na ito, pag-distribute ng laptop, parang in honor of yung anak naming Yumao. Ito yung aming pagpapaalala sa kanyang alala. Siguro gusto ko lang sabihin, ang laptop po ay isa lamang kasangkapan. Hindi yan magbibigay ng talino sa kahit sino. Sana gamitin niyo sa tamang paraan para hindi sayang potential.
I, on the other hand, came with some balls, which teacher Nursidin says will keep the young away from vices and bad influence.
Kids, gusto niyo ba maglaro? Gusto niyo maglaro ng sports? Sino gusto mag-basketball? Volleyball? Football? Huwag kayong matakot na kung subukan yung iba't ibang klase ng sports hanggang sa mahanap nyo yung para sa inyo. Hopefully, meron po tayong atleta na uusbong po dito mula sa Sulu.
At the end of our trip, we were pleasantly surprised to receive a gift, the warm embrace of thanks from teacher.
From the bottom of my heart, thank you very much for coming po.
Thank you for coming.
Inshallah, we will meet again.
Salamat po sa pagpunta dito. Huwag po kayong matakot dito sa ulo.
Babalik kami. Reporting for News 5, Gretchen Ho, We Are One News.
Ang balita ko, ayaw ka nang pauwiin ng mga tao doon.
Ikaw pala yung ayaw, hindi na pinababalik ni MVP.
No, let's not go there. Pero, no, I say that kasi, in the past kasi, Sulu had that reputation na, yung biruan, ayaw kang pauwi ng mga tao, ibig sabihin kidnap.
Ito, iba naman.
In this particular case, I suppose, and I think we all agree on this, we've seen a different face of Sulu from what we've seen in the past, from the reputation of the past.
You've been there 2017, I believe. So what
Last was
changed
2016.
for you?
It was kidnapping pa. But a lot has changed, and I think you will have a lot more to say about what changed in Sulu, from terrorism to tourism, sabi nga nila.
Nakakatuwa ako kasi yung mga schools, I mean, we don't see them, the students, the women, those who are affected in the middle of the conflict. We don't get to see their faces a lot on the news, and I wanted to highlight their plight. I mean, in this report, and as schools reopen, bigyan naman natin ng atensyon yung Barm region, specifically because sila yung lagging behind compared to the rest of the country. And we hope this story brings in more help, more resources to our family in Sulu.
Okay, at I suppose you can say magsukol. Thank you. Tausog.
And assalamualaikum.
Assalamualaikum.
Peace be upon you.
And that's the big story tonight. For more updates, follow News 5, the Philippine Star, and Business World Online. You may also log on to onenews.ph for more in-depth analysis. I'm Ed Lingao.
The big story is also available via Signal Play app. Make a free account now at signalplay.com and stream One News anytime, anywhere. I'm Gretchen Hall. Mask on, wash hands, and stay safe, Philippines.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.